spent 2 years at trade school learning how to be an aviation technician, but it really was love of airplanes and aviation. I started a small company, a handful of us started a small company in 1988, Cape Air, which some of you have heard of, some of you have probably flown on. Has anyone ever here flown on Cape Air, either around New England or in the Caribbean or in the Midwest or out in Micronesia? We have operations all over. We started that company with 5 people, very small business. I was a mechanic, I was a pilot. Think that television show Wings, remember that show? Don't think Lowell, but think Wings. And that company over the last 25 years has grown from a handful of employees to Cape Air, which now has over 1,000 employees. And there was a great article in the Cape Cod Times today, down on the Cape, saying that Dan Wolf should be allowed to run for governor because, and one of the things I was really proud of in that article is it talked about Cape Air and how it is a model company in so many ways. So not only did we grow a company from 5 employees to 1,000, but along the way we've become an employee-owned company because we do believe that those who build a successful organization should share in the success through ownership. We're a company, an airline, that has won awards from the Environmental Protection Agency for the largest solar project that we built on our hangar, our headquarters building on the Cape. 100% of our electricity comes from that solar project. We retrofitted the building, making it 43% more energy efficient. We actually engineered to have our aircraft engines modified. We paid for the engineering so that they save somewhere between 3 and 5% of the fuel that they burn, saving hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel. And were recognized a couple of years ago by the EPA for a lot of the green practices, not only that we practice in examples like that, but that we send home with our employees and work with the communities that we serve. Does anybody know what cow power is in Vermont? If you let your mind imagine what cow power might be. And we've engaged in projects like that. We serve Rutland, Vermont. We're working with the small island of Nevis, which we serve down in the Caribbean. Nevis is a volcanic island which has an incredible capacity for geothermal production. And we're actually working with the government of Nevis to make that island energy self-sufficient as an island. Right now they're importing all this fossil fuel. Cape Air is the only airline in the United States, usually this gets applause when I say it, that has the only airline that has a female president. People think, wow, that's something. The president of an airline is a woman. And people usually say, isn't that great? And I'm thinking, isn't that sad that we have to think that that's something special in this world? While I was growing the company, I met my wife at a restaurant on the Cape in Chatham. I used to eat there, and this incredible food kept coming out. One night I said, I'm going to stay here and see who's cooking this great food. And about midnight, this beautiful woman came out of the kitchen, and I was like, wow. And 6 years later, we got married and have raised 3 daughters on Cape Cod, all of whom graduated from the Nauset Regional School System, which I think is a model of great public education in the Commonwealth. And all 3 are out of the house now. My youngest daughter is down at NYU, reconnecting me with Manhattan, which has been a great experience. And my oldest daughter lives in Salem, and my middle daughter is currently working on the gubernatorial campaign, which is kind of neat. She graduated from Northeastern in political science. The reason I'm running for governor, in fact, the reason I ran for state senate, is I got to a point where, as my kids were going out into the world, and as I looked at the lot of the company that I'm still running, now with 1,000 employees, and the life of our employees, and I still tend to see the world through the eyes that I saw the world through as a mechanic 25 or 30 years ago. And certainly I see the world through the eyes of my 3 daughters. I think we all do. What's the world that they're going into? And I connect that world with some of the visions and ideals and hopes and dreams that I had when I was coming of age. There are a lot of people, I can tell by hair color, that were coming of age or certainly alive during the 60s when we were doing the civil rights struggle. We were talking about economic justice. The women's movement was really pushing ahead in so many exciting ways. The environmental movement, we were understanding our environment and how to be good stewards of our environment so much better. The activism from the Vietnam War, which got people onto the streets with a common cause, to work together, to get things done, and to really believe in changing the world. And when a few years ago, I looked at where we are, the world that we're getting ready to give to our children. DeVal Patrick talks about generational responsibility. I would even take it a step further and talk about generational legacy. Let's talk a little bit about the world that we're handing off to our children. When 69 cents on the dollar, which is what we remember during the struggles in the 60s and 70s, that's what a woman earned relative to a man. All we've got in Massachusetts is up to 77 cents on the dollar. That's 40 years later, and we've gone from 69 cents to 77 cents. Those neighborhoods that I canvassed when I was working for Acorn on Blue Hill Avenue, if I go back to those neighborhoods today, I could be in a time machine back 30 years ago. The unemployment rate among urban minorities is still around 25%, as it was back then. Just not acceptable. The minimum wage in Massachusetts since 1968, the minimum wage in Massachusetts since 1968 has gone down 25%. The dollar-adjusted minimum wage in 1968 was $22,000 a year. Right now it is $16,000 a year. Who would have ever thought that? Who would have thought that where we were then, you fast forward to now, and there would have been these challenges? Who would have thought, how many UMass Amherst people do we have in the room here? Got to be one. What year did you graduate? I'm sorry to age you, but around what year?
I'm going there now.
Around, okay. And anybody that graduated in the 70s? Or,
UMass Boston.
okay, what year?
We'll pass that.
All right, I'll stop. Are there any men who don't care about their age?
I'm asked at 73.
Okay, so your room board and tuition for a year was probably less than $2,000.
It was free.
Well, it was free. So that is less than $2,000.
Yes, it was.
My annual tuition at UMass Boston was $300. That's
Yeah.
annual tuition.
So in 1982, if you wanted to send your kid to one of the best higher education experiences in the United States of America, UMass Amherst, in 1982, room, board, and tuition was $3,800. You could come down to the Cape, and you could wait tables for the summer and put yourself through a year at UMass Amherst. You could go back to the Cape the next summer, go back, and do that 4 times, and get out of UMass Amherst with no debt. No debt. And there were jobs available, and the world was your oyster. That was 1982. That's only 30 years ago. If you want to graduate from UMass Amherst now, it's close to $25,000 a year.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that as we understood the importance of early childhood education and the importance now that both parents have to work of daycare, that we would have tens of thousands of kids on the wait list to get into early childhood education and daycare programs? Who would have thought that? Who would have thought that back then when certain people were protesting because the top 1% was earning 8% of the income in this country, and we believed that everybody had an opportunity, and now the top 1% earns 24%. People always say at this point, oh, he sounds just like Elizabeth Warren, and I say, yeah, but I got into politics 2 years before she did. So when you see Elizabeth say, God, you sound a lot like that guy Wolf. Who would have thought that the top 5% in this country, top 5% control 75% of our assets and property. 75%. And because that's so mind-boggling, I'll just tell a little story about that. I want you to imagine for a second a kindergarten classroom with 100 kids in it. Imagine that. Maybe it's your kid or your grandchild. And lunchtime comes and 100 lunches come in. Okay? Imagine that. 100 lunches come in and 5 kids step forward and they take 75 of the lunches. And now you got 95 kids and 25 lunches. Imagine another 5 kids step forward and take another 15 lunches. Now you've got 90 kids left, and you've got 10 lunches left. Imagine that. That's the structure of our economy in this country right now. And there's not a kindergarten teacher, there's not a parent, there's not a decent human being with an ounce of humanity who would let that happen in a kindergarten classroom. There just isn't. 20 of those kids will go to bed hungry. More than 20 of those kids will wake up in poverty. And that's the structure of our economy right now. And it's wrong. And it has happened over the last 30 years as we've seen our labor movement and our labor unions get whittled away and undone. And as we've seen our middle class and our working families lose their voice, it has over time been whittled away. So you can go through this list of who would have thought, when we reconnect ourselves, when we think back and connect our values as Democrats, our beliefs as Democrats, our goals, our visions, our aspirations as Democrats, to back then, and the world that we thought we were building, and we look at where we are today. And it's time for change. It's time to connect those values and beliefs with our public policy, with our politics, to work on building a great future. So I was giving this speech a few weeks ago, and I stopped and said, are there any questions? And one of my assistants who was with me said, well, what about the hope part? And I said, wow, I left that whole part of the speech off. So let's talk about what we do about that. What we do about it is we reinvest and commit to early childhood education because we know, we have the evidence that that's what creates opportunity for people, what allows people to have opportunity as they grow up. We recommit to lowering the cost of higher education so that it doesn't become a barrier and that we don't put the next generation into debt. I talked to a woman 2 nights ago, a single mother, who was putting her daughter through the UMass system. She was paying 9% interest. 9% interest. Now, other than being an airline founder and CEO, I also serve on the board of a bank. And I will tell you that 9% interest in today's interest environment is usury. That's a usury interest rate. And people talk about, well, that's who we have to charge, those young kids, we have to charge them because that's a risky loan, and we all know that interest rates are tied to risk. And I look at the Federal Reserve, right, charging 75 basis points, that's the Fed rate, less than 1%, to banks. And I think about the risk-quit ratio, and I'm thinking, okay, so we're charging the kids 9% because that's considered high risk, but we're lending the banks, the same banks that did what they did in 08 and 07, brought the economy to its knees. That's not a risky loan, so we'll loan the money to them at 75 basis points. Am I getting ready to be done?
Yeah.
Put a gentle hook. So here's the deal. It is about investing in education, early, upper, middle. It is about investing in infrastructure. You know, the whole infrastructure thing, people, their eyes roll up in their heads. There goes another politician talking about infrastructure. Let's talk about infrastructure. Let's talk about really building South Coast Rail. Let's talk about North-South rail connection and invest the money. Let's talk about the MBTA and really investing in it. I'm tired of having people from here go to Japan or Western Europe and come back and say, what's the best public transit system I've ever seen. I want people to visit us from around the world and say their metropolitan transit system, their train system, their regional transit authorities are the best in the world. We should rebuild, and we should reinvest in our transportation in a serious way. I'm finishing, Kate. Stop doing that. I don't get to do this that often. It's only the beginning.
We give you half an hour.
Okay. We're going to duke it out. And, energy infrastructure. On the Cape, we had a storm several months ago. 160,000 customers, 100,000 were without power for up to a week. If we got serious about reinvesting in our energy grid, we would create great jobs and we would end up with an energy source, both the creation and distribution and consumption, we should work on all three of those, that we will be proud to leave our children. So we can create great jobs by building what we know is a great tomorrow. And my final thing, and I'm going to question, those great jobs should be mindful of our values, our beliefs, and what we want our legacy to be, which is why I opposed casino gambling. I will have that discussion with you. I was in Fall River last night. I didn't get that exact same applause. The reason is not because morally I'm opposed to casino gambling. The reason is because when we look at where to create jobs, those jobs that we create should be jobs that we create to build great things so that we can be proud of them. There's not a person who believes in casino gambling that's going to lay their head on the pillow the last day they're alive and say, boy, I sure am proud of that casino. I left my grandchildren.